Hello, everyone. I'm Greg Goins from the Reimagine Schools podcast, a proud member of the Education Podcast Network, just like the show you're listening to right now. The opinions expressed are those of the individual host. Make sure you check out all the other great podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com and get ready because the learning begins in 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to the Instant Relevance Podcast. The Instant Relevance Podcast is an educational podcast featuring the latest news and resources to make learning relevant for all students. Follow us on Twitter at InstantRel. I'm Denis, author of Instant Relevance, using today's experiences to teach tomorrow's lessons, and Hacking Mathematics, 10 Problems That Need Solving. I'm a math teacher for 13 years and an administrator for 6, and I am excited to be podcasting.
I am Raymond Steinmetz, co-host of the Instant Relevance Podcast. I'm a K-8 math instructional coach from Rhode Island. I write and blog about a variety of topics related to education and parenting. You can find my work at www.blendedlearningmath.com, or you can follow me on Twitter at blended_math.
Today, we are excited to welcome Shane Lawrence to the Instant Relevance Podcast. This is a guy who has been influencing me in the way we do our podcast. He's been podcasting for a while at the Ed Podcast, which we just also like to call Ed. Might be tough to find that way, but we like to call the Ed Podcast Ed. And it's conversations about the teaching life. And he has gone back and forth and had some great guests. Right now, Shane is in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, and has taught junior high drama, computer, high school, junior high film studies. And we welcome Shane to this podcast. And why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and what you are currently moving towards, some of those new things in your life that you're excited about?
Oh, that's a big question. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on the show. I love it. I'll just come on and say that Raymond was one of the guests on my show, and I think that's kind of how we connected here. So as for me, gosh, what am I doing? That's something I have to ask myself every day. What am I doing? Yeah, I mean, sort of right now, the first semester, my bread and butter is computers and drama. And so, I mean, I've always been pushing right now towards, I think, in the parlance of your podcast, towards relevance, towards trying to make things more real. I mean, I started out 15 years ago teaching computers class. I took a big long break there in the middle to teach a bunch of English and whatnot, but just back to computers this past year, and it's changed so much. When I first started teaching, it was, teaching word processing and spreadsheets, and I'll go out on a limb, I'll say it. I think that was actually pretty relevant 15 years ago, but it's not as relevant. I mean, I know that employers still want people with those skills, but for me, I've been pushing more towards giving kids tasks that are more oriented towards their passions, towards problem solving, towards planning. And I'm not going to present myself as an expert nor someone who is exceedingly successful in this area, but I'm getting there in year to year, sort of for my second stint. So that's sort of the area that I think I'm most really trying to push at the boundaries of my own profession right now, is just giving kids those opportunities. We do some stuff that's really nuts and bolts because they still need some of those really mechanical kind of skills. They need to know how to, operate in the G Suite environment. They need to know, it's just some, all that sort of basic kind of stuff. But beyond that, they're also working on passion-based projects. They're reporting back to me once a month on what they're doing. So I've got kids that are building robots. I've got one kid who I'm super excited about because I got I guess a tip, if you will, from Brian Aspinall, who I had on my show about a while back. Do you guys know Brian Aspinall?
We do. He's been a guest on our podcast as well.
All right, there you go. Small world. Well, he was telling me about Microbit and how he had made some Fitbits with his kids. And this one kid I got in my class, he just great kid, but he would way rather spend his entire time just watching YouTube videos than actually do anything in computers class. So I said, what about this Microbit? We could actually build a Fitbit. And it was just like turning on a switch for this kid, just nuts. So he went in there and he was learning how to program this thing. We did, the Fitbit program is pretty straightforward using this Microbit computer. But I mean, he had this thing like he was holding it on his head and on his hip and like trying to figure out how to make it work best to count all his steps. And then he went online and found this other hardware that we get attached to it to make it more wearable. So we're getting one of those coming in soon. So it's just, that was a really cool moment for me just to see this, just a totally different person emerge in class just by finding sort of the right buttons to press, I guess, if you will. So, but I mean, that's one example of a lot of different projects that I've got going on. I've got some kids that just want to, they're building a cookbook. Some of the kids are building a go-kart. So it's a pretty wide range of stuff. And I know I'm going to have a wide range of successes and failures, but that's okay. That's okay. Because I mean, that's part of the learning process for them as much as it is for me. So, oh gosh, I could go on further. I could talk about film studies, but then we'd be here all day. So, because that's my other my big baby. Yeah, sure, we'll call it that. I'm also particularly proud of, but I feel like I'm filling a lot of space here. So how am I doing?
You're doing great. And it's funny, we actually just had Brian on, and I was just before we're recording this, I was editing down that episode a little bit. And one of the things that came up with Brian was you and him, it seems like you guys kind of fill this space of all the really cool math ancillary activities, like this project-based learning you're talking about with robotics. Brian does a lot of stuff with coding. It seems like math is kind of stripped of all the fun and is only left with kind of the numbers, right? And it kind of brings me to, I believe, one of the reasons that we had you on the show, beyond, I was a guest on your podcast and we have interacted online a little bit. One way we interacted online was Shane had tweeted out something, and I will quote it here, about math that I wasn't. I don't want to say that it was upsetting or anything like that. It was just interesting. So it says, whenever I see an inspirational quote about math and how it's about understanding the world around us, and it's not about numbers, I'm thinking, yeah, but it is numbers. And a lot of it is really hard. Am I missing something? So, of course I responded, and I don't want to just read back and forth, a Twitter exchange. But in general, I think that it was great that we are able to have you on kind of to talk about a little bit about how math really fills a space in the world beyond just the numbers and beyond just, the repeatable kind of do this step and then the next. And, I don't know if you want to jump in and maybe defend yourself, but the first question I have is, how dare you? And the second one is who do you think you are? So what do you have to say?
Well, I mean, I'm glad you cut off, your quoting of the Twitter, because I mean, that was a real flame war after that, I know. So
yeah, it's
glad.
I know you're Canadian, so it does get, Yeah,
it ended with me apologizing. I know I said sorry. I'm sorry a lot, right? So
yeah.
No, it's funny because like it always the one thing that comes to mind to me is as actually a scene, and I don't know why, but it's like the only scene I remember from A Beautiful Mind. Have either of you seen that film?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so with Russell Crowe, and there's one scene where he's like sort of in his college days, and he's sitting at a window watching a flock of birds just walk around on the ground, and he's writing a whole bunch of equations on his window, and his roommate's like, "Well, what are you doing?" He's like, "Well, I'm just doing this. I'm writing out, I'm describing the behavior of the birds with this math equation." And I mean, to me, that's just magic. I'm like, oh, I wish I could do that. I wish I had that sort of facility with numbers. I mean, full disclosure, I did, advanced placement math all the way up through grade 12. I did very well. I did, 2+ years. No, that's not true. I did a year and a half of computer science and then found out I'm terrible at it. So I went into English. But I guess to me, the experience though, going into university was I got to that level where I was like, I don't get this anymore. I hit a wall like hard, like studying 10 hours a day, not getting anywhere kind of hard. And I didn't leave sort of the realm of math with my tail between my legs. I didn't leave with bitterness or anger or anything like that. I just was like, wait a minute, I really like English. So I'm going to go over there because I love that stuff and I'm good at it. But I guess the thing that I walked away from that with was this understanding for myself, at least, that at a certain point, yeah, math is just hard. It's hard. And I see students struggling with it too. And so I just wonder, I see there's a lot of, sort of, I'm not going to say negative sentiment, but pushback against someone saying math is hard. Well, don't say it's hard, or no, it's, I'm not good at math. Is that like, is it disallowed to say I'm not good at math anymore? Like I guess that's where I'm coming from, right?
Right, Shane. That's it's an interesting point, because we do talk about that a lot, especially when we're talking about students and young students in a learning process. And so what's fun for me is I love that movie, Beautiful Mind. I've seen it. I've shown it to my kids because it can be inspirational for a lot of them too. And actually, I really like that scene. And one of the fun things that you mentioned about that scene is that when he's drawing on the window, there actually aren't any numbers. It's all like symbols and things that represent thoughts and processes and things. And it's an interesting sideline to the fact that what are the components of the things that we see and that we do? It's like when you say, I love English and I'm really good at it. That doesn't mean that you just have an unending vocabulary bank. It means that you know how to flexibly use language to communicate and express yourself. And when someone understands, they're history lovers, it's not because they want to memorize timeline dates. It's because they see the connections between 1776 in the United States and 1776 in Mozart's life, when they were both writing in rebellious worlds at the same time. And they make these connections and stories and tell the differences between the two. And that's what we're getting at when we say that math isn't just numbers. It's not just the basic pieces that build what it is to use what you are thinking in a problem-solving, creative, flexible way, using the numbers and the understandings in ways that express yourself mathematically or in a problem-solving way. And so when we have young students who are impressionable and at the same time still very cognitively malleable, to say I'm not good at math and to accept that is to say that they're actually potentially turning on a block inside their development that says I can't go down this road. When you're an adult and you reach a point in your life where you're about to say, this is really hard and I would like to choose something else. That's a choice. You should watch me try to ice skate, man. It is not good. And you're from Canada. I'm going to guess you're better at it than I am, but I am not a water sports guy, melted or solid. And when you watch me try to ice skate, you might think like, has that guy ever been out there before? And I have, but it's hard for me from that. I just don't get it. Why? And so when it comes to winter, I choose something else, and so to reach a point where you say, it's hard. You are absolutely correct. And at every point in time, even in, 5th grade math, 8th grade math, algebra 2, whatever you want to be, there's a point where it becomes very challenging. And it's our goal as math teachers now to not just deliver information that says, well, here's the information you need to get through this, but to teach kids through what we call the productive struggle. I think you probably heard that out there as well. To me, I call this a river bend moment mathematically, where if you're picturing yourself canoeing on a river and the current is moving you along, when that river bends, the current slows down and it starts to back up a little bit like traffic. And you just need to know how to navigate that safely to get through so the current can pick back up. And that's what our teaching style is now, is to help students navigate those learning slowdowns that another person might say, this is too hard, I'm getting out of the boat, versus we can get around this and we can then have more current behind us. So, there isn't just a flat out slant against saying that I'm bad at math, but there is a deterrent away from it, especially in youth, to make sure that it doesn't become something that aims students away from mathematical learning, conversations, and problem solving because of a misconception.
So it kind of sounds to me like the eat your broccoli principle, right? So it's like you gotta, I'm not saying math is broccoli, so easy, Raymond, it's all good.
We love broccoli over here, it's fine.
Yeah, that's all good. Well, okay. Anyway, the point is, it's like when you're in a younger stage, you're, like you say, your brain is so flexible, your brain is just ready for input just naturally, because that's just the physiological state you're in. So to just dismiss something before you've given it sort of a fair shake is maybe doing a disservice to whatever it is that's being presented. Is that kind of what we're getting at here?
I would say so. Yes,
Okay. Yeah.
especially like virtually anything. Like when we talk about,
Mhm.
I was a double major in math and music in college, and if I thought about, learning music I started younger and I enjoyed it, so I continued with it. Whereas my brother started younger and didn't have the interest for it, and he cut it off. And now it's much more difficult for him to learn a new instrument than it is for me because of the training behind me.
Mhm.
And so I think about your kids in your computer science class as well. And I mean, we are teaching coding to kids as young as they can get,
Mhm.
and
Oh yeah.
and how come? Because we know that it develops their thinking processes, their understanding for it, not just as a prerequisite to later coding, but because of the value that it builds in them cognitively and developmentally. And we think it's more than just the code blocks that we teach them. It's
Mhm.
definitely the idea behind how to use those to problem solve and to create, and that's a big thing to teach kids, that they can do that, and that they can create, and they can problem solve in new ways. Like those kids who come into your room, it's like super passionate about you know div-
Mhm.
and so that's you're right. It's definitely looking at this from a broad spectrum, and at the same time to tell adults who have felt in the past that they just weren't good at math, that if they are interested, they are capable, and we can teach them in
Yeah.
in a method that they can approach and be successful at, that it's not just memorization and step recall. And that's another message to those who are let's call us older, if you will, and interested.
Well, I love like the whole coding thing. Like again, 15 years ago, teaching computers, we didn't do coding because it would have been like, Fortran or, whatever. It was there was no friendly mode of getting people into coding, necessarily, except, basic or like Turbo Pascal or something like that. But so now, leap ahead to where I started teaching it again last year. And it was about a 10-year gap, I'm going to say, and just we just did Scratch. Um, and the thing that blew me away about it, I mean, getting back to, that coding is a way of sort of building neural pathways for problem solving and creativity. The creativity, if I hadn't been teaching coding for a little bit now, I would have disagreed just flat out. It's like, no, it's coding. It's logical. It's just A, B, C, if then, right? Um, we did a little exercise where, there's a piece of code with an error in it, and the kids had to fix it. And I look at it, I'm like, okay, this is the solution. And I, you know, pushed it out, told my kids, this is what you got to do. Here's the problem. Try and solve it. And at first I'm like, no, that's not, no, you don't do it that way. Just wait. No, you're doing it wrong. And then I realized there's like 6, 7, 10, 20 different solutions coming at me, and they all work. And that's just like, my mind was blown. I was like, oh, I get it. I get why we do the coding thing now, because it is it's a way to build problem solving, resiliency, all these, really great buzzwords. But creativity, I never would have guessed is actually part of that. I wouldn't have believed it until I'd actually done it myself. So that's been really cool to experience that. And, kind of going even back further, one of the things you said, which I loved about math, and it ironically, it built a connection in my mind, because it's like, oh, was you talking about how math helps people connect to the real world. I mean, there's nothing I like better than, just being able to, see something from, pile A and realize that it originated in pile B. Like, gosh, a few days ago, I was listening to a song from like this 70s funk group that I just unearthed on Spotify, listening to a song, and I hear this one little snippet, and I was like, oh, that was sampled by the Spice Girls. I just, there's this little horn riff from this 70s funk song, and just realizing that it had this connection to piece, that was a little more modern. I'm dating myself, I suppose. But just stuff like that, like those connections, I think for students are so valuable, because it's like these little fireworks going off, and it's like, oh yeah, because going, and again, sorry, here I go, I'm sorry, but going off to like the film studies side of thing, where even as I'm always educating myself more and more about film history and kind of filling in the gaps in the continuum. And I explain this to the students, with film history, it's like, you're not going to start getting this for a while. But the idea of like, if you look at a timeline and you got, a little dot, which is an event here, and another dot, which is an event here, the more dots you get, eventually those dots start to touch. And then you can start seeing that continuum, and that gives you a greater understanding of sort of the deeper magic of film, or it can give you the understanding of sort of the deeper magic of math and how all these things fit together. Like Prime last year was being able to show my kids a clip from the Disney film Mulan, and it directly quotes a sequence from a Kurosawa film. And like to them, just seeing the lights when I showed it to them, and they're like, "Oh yeah, that's like we just watched that," and that stuff is so cool. That is so cool. And I mean, if you can do that with math, that's amazing. But again, I don't have enough dots on my math timeline to really see that. So, can I turn this around on you guys and ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
Okay,
go
I'm
for
going to
it.
I'm going to ask you another one now. So how do you help students make connections? Because I mean, my memories of math in school were just learn your times tables, learn the formulas, apply the formulas, move the numbers, make the right thing come out at the end. I enjoyed that, maybe because I'm weird, but because there wasn't a lot of that real world connection. So how do you do that?
Yeah, I can definitely field that question. Being the math coach, I think that is down my alley. You actually just said a lot of really great things that I'm going to kind of tie in here. I think that math, well, we all know that math has changed a lot in the last couple years, and I'm actually very fortunate to see math happen at a younger level now. So I'm actually in kindergarten this week, and I was in kindergarten playing math games with kids recently. And it's interesting what you had to say about those aha moments you had as a teacher teaching computer science. And you kind of alluded to it, like, wouldn't it be great if math could do the same thing? If you could see that great problem solving and really those great connections happening in math class. And I can tell you right now, with the way that math is taught in the elementary level, that's what's happening. There are a lot of great things. I think that the way that a lot of math programs are no longer just doing procedural, which is kind of what you had alluded to as well, is saying, this is how you do this certain type of math problem, and really it just being a step-by-step process, which is very code-like, so if your brain works in that way, then, the procedural way of doing math is really great for you. But all the research is kind of pointing to not only the procedural, but the conceptual. So what I see happening a lot in the lower grades is a lot of different strategies being given to the kids, and it really just building that kind of just neural pathways of, okay, we're not just going to memorize the multiplication tables. We're going to know a bunch of different methodologies, including visual methodologies, to kind of understand what multiplication is, so that we build that conceptual understanding. But then again, we are going to have that procedural knowledge of, the actual times tables. You just have to kind of know them. So having both is very important, because that is the foundation of math. And you also alluded to, in what you said before, kind of the importance that you see of computer science kind of in cognitive development. And what I'm seeing now in the lower grades, and seeing math kind of at the lowest level, even in kindergarten, and even below that, because I have a 4-year-old daughter now, we always kind of forget the role that math plays in cognitive development. And the reason that your students at the level that you teach now can problem solve the way they do, and really can use the tools in front of them and be able to approach a new situation, and use, whatever things that they have in their past to be able to solve those situations. A lot of those things are practiced in math in early ages. And, it's really unfortunate from what I've seen, because I see a lot of this great work, and math has changed a lot in the lower elementary and just in the elementary level. I haven't seen as much of that shift in middle and high school, because I think kind of what we're talking about is, once math kind of becomes a little bit harder, that's where we lose people, and it's not as fun. And, it becomes more procedural, even more procedural, because you're talking about things like algebra, and we really start losing people. And so wouldn't it be great if everything that you described in your CS class, that could be the same thing in math. And I think that there's no reason that it can't be. And I think that it's going to take kind of a huge shift in thinking about the place that math plays in our society, from just this thing that we have to pass to get by to something that is a great subject to be studied and to really delve yourself into. Because something you kind of said at the beginning was, math gets hard. Well, if everybody backed away from math just because it's hard, we wouldn't have some really great discoveries in our world. And some people really like a challenge, and you can probably attest to a lot of your students who like computer science. They probably like it because they like a challenge. Well, those are probably the same students that should have a good relationship with math if it was, relevant to them. They should have that same relevant, really great relationship with math in enjoying a challenge and really delving deep into problem solving.
Ray, I think I can add a little bit to that too. And you talked a lot really strongly about the instructional piece and the pedagogy piece and what it is that makes it a different experience for students now. And I think it does taper off as you get to middle and high, because I think there's fear there. There really is. If I was to graph, and I'm a math person, if those exist, so I was going to graph it. There's a crossover point where there's in general a high level of pedagogical skill in elementary, where some would say that there's lower content expertise, versus in the high school level there's a high level of content expertise, and to be honest, much more a lower level of pedagogy. Like the ability to understand how to teach a really difficult concept doesn't exist in most high schools. Just how can I tell you the thing that I know in my steps? And that's why it becomes challenging. Whereas someone teaching elementary often says, I can help you understand what's going on here, because what you have to understand is not necessarily all that complex for you to understand. So I can understand how it works more deeply. And I think that's what needs to change, is we need to find a way to increase the pedagogy skills of higher grade teachers to be able to truly allow for transfer of understanding. And that's something I think, if you want to talk about volcanic shifts here, we need to stop putting math in this place of transcript, college disqualifier, only thing that gets you a career and a job. Focus on STEM education because it's the only important thing in the whole wide world. Back off of that stuff for a little bit and let's just do what you said, which is let's just notice it around us. Between 3 and 4% of high school graduates in the United States go on to engineering or pure math careers and majors. That means 96, 97% of kids just need to be able to enjoy, understand, recognize, and know when to use or learn how to use some mathematics in their life and in their career. And that's an important piece of information to understand. That says to me, let's stop teaching this from a pure, this is hard, but you can all do it. Oh, you can all learn calculus by senior year, and turn it back into, how can we make this engaging and fun and exciting and recognizable and useful? And even just a couple of weeks, last week, I put out a blog post on something that really bugs me, to be honest. And it's usually when something bugs me, it gets a blog post out of me. And it's about all these companies out there, because it's winter now. All these companies that are advertising their products with winter advertising pieces to it, and all of a sudden they have snowflakes all over their stuff, and their snowflakes aren't hexagons. Okay, now the natural formation of a water crystal is hexagonal, but I'm seeing products out there that have ones that have 8, 16, 27, 5 points on their hexagon, on their snowflakes. I'm thinking, you guys don't understand this basic idea that it's supposed to be a stinking hexagon. In fact, I tweeted one out yesterday to Walmart because they had one that had 7 points on it. And I even wrote on there, your logo is a hexagon. You could have used your logo for the snowflakes. Major branding opportunity lost. And they actually tweeted me back calling me a really unique snowflake. So I'll take that for whatever it's worth. But on the other side of that, what the part of that post was, we used to give our kids in elementary school a sheet of instructions on how to fold some paper so that they could cut it out and make a pretty snowflake.
Mhm.
Right? That's old math instruction. Here are the instructions. Follow the steps. Do the thing. And instead I said, let's stop that. Let's just give them a sheet of paper and say, make a snowflake out of it. And when they all make a snowflake that's rectangular, we can say, wait a second, that's not what a real snowflake is. Try again, try again. Let them go through the design process to come up with their own set of instructions on how to make a snowflake. And through the process of it, learn about some geometry, some shapes, how hexagons can be formed through a folding process, and what other shapes they're creating by the cuts that they're making, and deciding, looking at the snowflake that I made that finally was a hexagon, the shapes on the inside are kites and trapezoids. And it's like, wow, we just did a whole 5th grade hierarchy of quadrilaterals lesson without having to give them a sheet to memorize and spit back to me on a quiz. That's how I look at engagement and relevance and connection and context, as an opportunity to teach and to make those connections in a much more exciting way. And the kids still walk out of there understanding the objective.
Can I confess something right now? Of course
Sure.
I can. I'm getting ideas for math lessons right now while you're talking. This is hilarious.
That's why we're here. That's totally why
Yeah.
we're here. And actually, I wanted to throw one last thing back out to you too, and
Yeah,
that
yeah.
was, as you teach drama and you teach film studies, if you haven't already, I could find a way to connect that to your coding classes and your computer science classes. When you think about the components of a basic drama, the characters, the pieces, the steps, the plot, the flow of it, all the film pieces of it, it literally is a microcosm of coding a program. And I see that as like, how can you code this theater piece? How do you look at all the structures of it? How do you build this? You even said before, how do you make an organization out of this? And it's like your kids seem like, I feel like your coding classes could probably be the best theater directors you've ever had. And encouraging you to try to make a connection in between those two things, because they seem to be some pretty strong passions of yours.
Oh, absolutely they are. I mean, man, I'm just thinking like film studies, especially like my high school class. It's a beast. It's an absolute beast. It's actually 3 courses combined. So, and it's getting bigger every year. But yeah, I'm gonna need some time to absorb that.
All right.
I'm gonna tell you straight up. I'm gonna need some time to absorb. But I mean, one of the things that I remember exactly what you said, but essentially talking about giving students the opportunity to essentially, learn the skills and then have those skills hit the ground. Like in terms of hit the ground running, get them moving, get them active, get them actually doing something with it. And that's the way, again, that's getting back to that connection idea, right? If you can actually do something with it rather than just, well, I solved that problem on paper, I put the right number down, right? That's not nearly as exciting as, I remember a sum total of one math lesson from my high school career. And it kind of harkens back to your snowflake thing, where it was in high school. And our teacher comes in, and I don't remember what's grade 11, 12, but he comes in and he gives everybody one of those big protractors, like, I don't know, a foot across, 30 centimeters across, whatever you want to say. Gives us one of those, a string, and a piece of chalk. And just like in a pile, like, there you go, 1, 2, 3. And he says, okay, go measure the height of the building. And that was it. And we were just like, wait, what do we do? What? And he said, go outside, go measure the building. I mean, I probably remember the lesson in part because I got to go outside, which was nice. But I just remember, figuring out that, if I tie the string onto the protractor with the chalk, using it as a weight, then I can actually, measure the angle of the building, and I can measure how far I am away from the building, and I can figure out the height just using some, trigonometry. But I mean, that's that moment, right, where the math that I was using hit the ground, right? And I got to actually go and do something with it, and it stuck with me. So I just love what you're saying about that, like just making, helping students see that math has a connection to the real world, and the better you can do that, and the more sort of you can focus on allowing them to solve problems and discover what those things are. And I mean, that's the same for, I think, any area of learning, right? Discovery is going to be more effective, because then you've got students who, if they're going to make that discovery, they've got to push. And so then when you get to the end, there's that reward of discovery, and that's valuable. So yeah. Just like I said, I've got all these like ideas for math lessons in my head now. And I was like, we could do this, we could do that. And that'd be just a pile of fun.
Yeah, I think that, sorry, Shane, to interrupt. I think that something that has come up in what both you and Dennis just said is there's all these great creative things to do with math. And I think that math kind of gets put in this box that it's not creative and not for creative people, and doesn't have to do with like creative endeavors. Like there's this demarcation line between like the arts and like engineering and math and that sort of thing. And I think that we really need to make sure that especially creative people know that, you know, how important a math education can be to help alongside of a creative career, and be able to really, you know, boost your ability to create. And, you know, just because you're a math person, or, you know, once again, there are no math people, but just because you're a person who likes math doesn't mean you're not creative either. I mean, sitting here with someone who's a music major and a mathematician, and Denis, and I consider myself a pretty creative person, and I'm a math teacher, but, you know, it's not putting people in boxes just because of the subjects that they're good at. And I think that that really limits kind of a student's thinking about their future and what they could possibly do, when really they should be thinking about, you know, what could I do with a math career, and, you know, something that's creative as well.
Yeah, and I think one of the things I'm kind of keeping track of, writing down some notes here. And one of the words I wrote down that I think is a really valuable thing is just providing cross-curricular opportunities. And that, I mean, that is a really, really hard thing to do. And I'm, you know, speaking especially from my own experience with, you know, film studies, we incorporate our digital media class with the film studies class with the drama class to create our films. And that took at least 2 years before we even decided, or before we could even connect the classes together effectively. So I recognize it's a really difficult thing to do, but if you can bring math across into other areas and, you know, help students get rid of this idea, I think that's one of the things you have to fight against, is the idea that there are subjects in life. And, you know, one of the latest sort of mantras I'm always spitting at my kids is like, there's no subjects in life, kids. You're allowed to do math and English class if you need to. You can do, you know, you can do skills in computers. You know, you can take computers into phys ed, whatever, right? Like those opportunities exist. It's not a, you know, one-to-one, everything's all in this one giant pot, but there are those connections, and they need to be unearthed, I think, in order for people to, you know, see the value in whatever, in math, in English, and all these things that we've kind of siloed, I think, incorrectly, I'm going to say. I think it was a decision made a long time ago that it doesn't really pan out very well in our incredibly interconnected world.
Shane, I think you hit the nail on the head with that last one, and it is true. I think we just need to remember that pretty clearly. There are no subjects in life. We have the opportunity to engage in all types of learning at all times. We write in math class. We calculate in science class. We think about history in music class, but also when we just go out there in life, all of those things just meld together. And we have to remember that we're preparing our kids for life. We're not just preparing them for a future math class or a future science class. And so I want to thank you for your insights and for your openness, and actually for sharing with us that we've stirred your curiosity. And I would love to see if you ever incorporate some specific math stuff in any of your lessons, but some of those exciting cross-curricular things that you do, make sure you're tweeting Raymond and myself when you put those out there. We welcome the opportunity to see exciting things in classrooms. So again, thank you for sharing your time with us tonight, and for sharing what you do in your classroom and in your everyday. And we look forward to seeing more from you in the future.
Absolutely. It's been a blast. Thanks a lot, guys. It's been fun.
Thanks, Shane. Do you want to share how people can get a hold of you online as well?
Sure. I mean, the easiest way is at the Ed Podcast on Twitter. My website's just theedpodcast.podbean.com. You can email me at theedpodcast@gmail.com. That's really the best ways to get a hold of me. I'm on Twitter more than I should be, probably. So that's honestly going to be the best way to do it.
All right. Thanks for joining us, and have a great night.